name the three most important challenges for Europe in order of scale and significance for the next 3 decades. Let's see if we can have an overlap.
First, developed military and security capacities to face a very dangerous world coming up in the next 3 decades. Second, to lead or at least be competitive in the economic technological transformations having to do with AI and climate. And third, to stay united, because the pressure to break the European Union apart is going to continue and probably get even stronger.
Okay, Balázs.
First of all, welcome everybody. Thanks for inviting me to the new bullshit scenario. So I will stop bullshitting and answer the questions. I would say migration, because it changes the background of the European civilization, and we don't know where it will lead us. The second one I would mention is economic. I would rather use a harsh term, economic decline, because it seems that we are losing competition with the other great powers. So if you compare European economy with Chinese or American economy or other developing economies, then we are not on the good side. And my third would refer pretty much on what Bruno was saying, and I would use the Emmanuel Macron's term, strategic sovereignty. So Europeans should finally think strategically, rather focusing on geopolitical issues and forget about ideological conflicts. And from that strategic sovereignty point of view, we have to understand how we react on 21st century challenges. And there are many challenges. We have to understand what will be the relation between America and Europe, what will be the relationship between Russia and Europe, China and Europe, and what are the interests of the European continent, and how we'll be able to protect them. It's obviously military capabilities are part of this discussion, because currently we are not capable of protecting ourselves without the Americans, and not capable of influencing what is going on around Europe, even in neighboring countries. So I'm not talking about Afghanistan and Central Asia, I'm talking about Middle East, sometimes the Balkan, or North Africa. Europe is not in the game. We are just talking, not acting. That's a serious problem.
Well, you mentioned pretty similar things, actually, which is funny, but none of you mentioned climate change, which is interesting because according to our poll conducted among audience members, this is definitely one of the top 3 challenges facing this continent as well in the next coming few decades. So we decided that it deserves some special attention. And now we have a truly original voice joining us as a special guest from Washington, D.C. Georgetown University, a former war correspondent turned political scientist, Mr. Anatol Lieven. Mr. Lieven, in your book called Climate Change and the Nation State, you declare that the only politics that can save us from ecological disaster is actually nationalism. Please tell us how you ended up with this rather unorthodox hypothesis, and let's see how our guests on stage react to that.
In my book, I don't say that nationalism is the only solution to action against climate change, but I do say that I think it can make a very valuable contribution. And there are a number of reasons for this. The first thing that struck me as somebody who comes from the field of security studies and realist international relations is that populations are ready in the world today, can be convinced to pay comparatively very high taxes or shares of their taxes towards meeting conventional security threats, which in fact do not threaten them directly at all, and it can be argued do not even seriously threaten their countries. So this suggested to me that if threats can be cast as threats to the country, threats to national security, that this can mobilize a willingness to make sacrifices to meet them. And the need to make sacrifices is, unfortunately, I think, critical to the struggle against climate change. Both because, as has so often been said, a key problem is that you're asking the present generation to make sacrifices to ward off dangers which will only become truly acute for future generations. So that's the first thing. And secondly, unfortunately, as we have seen again and again, from the yellow vests in France to repeated referenda in the United States and elsewhere, people may say that they want their governments to take action against climate change, but whenever it's a question of actually making sacrifices themselves in terms of higher taxes, in terms of higher prices for fuel, for energy, you get majorities against it. And the melancholy fact of the matter is that sacrifices will be necessary. This isn't simply going to be a question of some benign Green New Deal. I'm strongly in favor of the Green New Deal, but partly because sacrifices will need to be shared to some extent. It's no good simply blaming the corporations. Corporations sell things to us. You know, we are all complicit in carbon emissions. So we need a strategy that will actually lead people, motivate people to make sacrifices. And therefore, attachment to the nation means by definition that you have to care about the future of the nation in generations to come. And so that helps to answer this key dilemma of how you get people today to make sacrifices for future generations. Because when you come to think of it, that's what our soldiers, insofar as they do make sacrifices today, are doing. That's what they are paid to do. That is what their duty to do is, and always has been. You know, not just to protect the present generation of British or Hungarian or German or whoever people, but to protect the country in the generations to come. So I hope that has been interesting and provocative. Thank you all for listening, and thank you all for coming to the conference, and I wish you very interesting debates. Thanks a lot.
Guys, how do you find the ideas of Mr. Lieven?
I'm very much in agreement. I actually discussed Anatol's book with him a couple of years ago in Russia, and we both agreed that climate and climate policy had to become a lot more geopolitical. Lots of people believed a few years ago, and some still believe today, that climate is going to be the moment when we stop thinking about geopolitics. We come together all over the world in cooperation and harmony to solve a common problem. And I always thought this is a delusion. It's not going to happen, and it's not happening. The good news is that as climate becomes more geopolitical, we start to see more action. The good news over the past 2 or 3 years is that the competition between China, US, and the EU to see who leads the climate revolution is actually finally getting us real policy and real technological solutions. If we stayed within the framework of Paris, that is not the framework I like, we get nothing. We get no action. We need actually to have geopolitical competition. But it is a dead serious game, because remember, in history, why did England become the global superpower and build a global empire? Because it led the first industrial revolution, which was an energy revolution based on coal. Why did the US then replace England as the global superpower? Because it led the second industrial revolution based on electricity. And whoever leads the current climate energy revolution is going to be the next superpower. So whether it's China or the US, I still have some hope that the EU can at least be part of the game. It's going to determine the world we live in for the next, perhaps the next century.
Balázs?
There is quite an agreement between us. I think the climate change is an important issue from a public policy point of view, but it's not an extinction debate, it's an adaptation debate, whether we be capable of adapting to the changes or not. And it's nation states, national governments should play a very important role. Climate was always changing. We had, you know, in medieval periods of time, we had wineries in Norway, not far from Oslo, But since then, the climate has changed, so don't drink Norwegian wine anymore, prefer the Hungarian one. And that's also kind of an adaptation question.
And it's also very closely related to the migration issue.
Of course, of course. There is a clear link between migration and climate change. Those people who are leaving their home countries, they are a big portion of them, they are leaving from climate change issues, which are destabilizing the societies and destabilizing the states, and that's why they have to make a decision to leave. I think I'm not a great fan of climate alarmism, although there were the kind of sometimes I feel that the West is hypocritical on that issue. If you do remember the protests, Friday for Future or Future for Friday, I don't know. So the Friday for Future protests were nice protests, but the Hungarian ones were not far from the office. And I had the opportunity to see the protesters, and after the protest, they protested for governments to take action, and then they went to, these young people went to the Starbucks, and they asked for a mango smoothie. You understand why it is hypocritical, because the mango is imported from 10,000 kilometers away, and it's a very pollutive way of importing fruit. So if you do care climate change, then don't drink mango smoothie in Hungary, but rather than that, drink apple juice. So, but this kind of paradigm shift, this kind of mindset shift, it didn't happen yet. We, on the government side, on the Hungarian government side, we try to influence these kind of plastic debates. We had concrete actions like forestation. We had a huge project on forestation, like the zero plastic policy we introduced, or the zero garbage policy, which is always refers on the idea of patriotism and localism. So if you want to have a nice environment around us, it means that you are patriotic. So it's a patriotic thing. But if you are a proud Hungarian, that you want to have a nice environment, nice and green environment around you. Paris Agreement, and other international agreements can play an important role. I'm not saying not, but it's more, again, talking, not taking actions.
So coming back to old-fashioned geopolitics now, I would like to talk a little bit about the balance of power. The balance of power in Europe is traditionally based on a relationship between Germany, France, and Russia. And my question is, do you see any shift coming in this landscape? And I'm also curious about your opinion about a few other countries, Poland and Turkey. So what role waits for them in the next decades?
Well, my first book is called The Dawn of Eurasia, and the argument there is that we have to stop thinking about geopolitics as a European phenomenon. It's too small. The stage is too small. Our neighbors now are Turkey, Russia, India, and China. China is now an actor of European politics. There have been ministers in the UK that had to resign on a scandal involving potential Chinese influence. There are debates every day, and very intense debates about what we should do about China. The most important issue in Lithuania right now and in Estonia is China.
Sorry, you're saying the balance of power as we know it from history books. Is that, or you say that the balance of power is now extended to another set of countries?
It's extended. We have increasingly to think about a much larger stage. And we have to think about how to balance power in this much larger stage. So, for example, when we think about Turkey, and maybe here we can start our ferocious exchanges. When we think about Turkey, I think as a very important ally of the European Union, as we try to project our influence, as we try to have some influence in areas like the Caucasus, in areas like North Africa, in areas like the Middle East, and Turkey is a country that we can work with. Turkey is a country that we don't want to come too much under Chinese or Russian influence. It's not an adversary, it's a balancer in the middle, a potential ally. And we have to think, when we think about Russia, we have to think very clearly, is Russia a threat Or is actually the larger threat that within 20, 30 years, Russia is going to come under Chinese control? A China that has a measure of control over Russia and has access to the natural resources that Russia has is probably going to be a China that is too powerful for Europe to resist. The next stage would be Chinese influence in Europe. So you can see that I do think Turkey is important. I do think Poland is very important. But I'm always thinking now on a Eurasian stage. I think the 19th century picture of balance of power in Europe has now been replaced by a much larger stage, where the United States also plays a part, but we have to realize, and Balázs already mentioned this, we have to realize that the United States is becoming increasingly more distant. And some of these challenges having to do with the other powers that we share a supercontinent with are going to be challenges that we have to deal on our own. And we at least need to have a plan B for when the United States is no longer there. And the moment when the United States is no longer there may actually be now already, from what we saw in Afghanistan.
No conflicts yet. I agree with your analysis. I think, you know, we have to be quite honest. It seems that 21st century will be a century of Asia, of China. So it's a rising power, and it can happen that sooner or later it will be the dominant power. Some of them are saying that there is still an ongoing fight between USA and China, who will be the leader of this century. But there are some Americans who are saying that, that in the United States, the fight is not anymore about who will be the leader of the world, but rather who will be the leader of the West. So their strategic question is how they will remain the leader of the West. And we Europeans have to think outside the box. And we didn't do it since the Second World War. Because since the Second World War, United States of America provided freedom and prosperity and peace. Pax Americana after the Cold War, it was there. So we didn't focus, we Europeans didn't focus on the strategic issues. But it can happen that the strategic interests between the United States and between Europe, they are not the same anymore. And I agree with you that we should have a rational, very pragmatic relationship with Russia, but it should be based on economic cooperation and equal military power. But right now, we are, from a military point of view, we are not equal with the Russians, and we have sanctions on the economic side. So we are doing exactly the opposite, what it should be done. We should cooperate on the economic basis and protect ourselves from a military point of view. And that's also the case with China. And I think Central Europe and Hungary can play an important role on figuring out what this strategic sovereignty of Europe would mean, because it goes against our interest to have a new Cold War, and we want to avoid it, and we want to create a balanced relationship between all the players. But we have to, first of all, we have to fix our problems, because if we don't do it, then history will move forward, and it will be without Europeans. So we will be more and more a Skansen, we call it a Skansen, and not an economic or geopolitical superpower. Frankly, it's not easy to accept this by the Europeans, because if you look on the history, the last 300 years, 400 years, not for us, for Central Europeans, because we were desperately fighting for our sovereignty, but for the Westerners, they were the leaders of the whole world, and it's not anymore the case. We have to get used to it and renew our strategy.
Now, this guy is a very rare example of those political analysts who are equally critical towards each side of the political spectrum. I've even seen a whole Twitter feed which is about speculating about your personal politics. It's so mysterious. And now, Bruno, you were pretty harsh about the government of Hungary recently. And I think this is the time to have a direct exchange on your critics, on your problems. So please share, as you see, what the problem is with the Hungarian leadership. And Balázs, please respond. Finally, we can have some debate on stage.
Excellent. So let me focus on what is really my disagreement. I saw the other day Prime Minister Orbán in the Bled Strategic Forum in Slovenia say, and I think I'm being faithful in describing his words, that the refugees coming to Europe are all Muslim, and that in the end they threaten to replace us in Europe. And I imagine replaces means replaces Christians. Now, what is my experience? It's very different from this. I was just in Afghanistan. I spent almost 2 weeks just before the fall of Kabul in Afghanistan, and met dozens of people, businessmen, local journalists, local politicians. Are you going to believe that Islam never came up in all these conversations, hours of conversations? Islam never came up. We talked about...
But then the Taliban raised the issue, right?
No, let me tell you what we talked about. We talked about what is happening to America. How does America allow itself to be humiliated in this way? And can we trust America? What is China up to? What's going to happen with India? So we talked about politics, and I am by temperament and also by training someone who thinks that really behind every religious discussion there's politics. And let's go straight to the politics. Because whether the true God is the God of the Bible, the God of the New Testament, or the God of the Quran has no relevance in politics. What has relevance is how we organize society. And sometimes I think that actually Muslims are much more able to move beyond the theological discussions and talk about politics. And we can talk about politics with people with different opinions. But I don't think the question of Christianity or question of Islam is an important question when we talk about politics. What we have is to reach out to people who are Muslim and have a productive exchange about how to organize society. And in some cases, we may actually conclude that they have better ideas on this point or that point, and we can learn from people with different ideas. My ideal is always the ideal of early modern Europe with enormous diversity, where you have people fighting for their ideas in an environment of free exchange. And we're going back to that. What is the present moment is the moment where liberal ideas are collapsing. And suddenly we have an open horizon, and we have to create new ideas anew. It's not the moment to go back to past ideas. It's not the moment to go back to Christianity as an organizing principle. It's the moment to go forward, to move beyond liberalism, but not to move back from liberalism into what existed before.
Well, I think the difference... I think the difference between us is that you are an independent thinker, and you can be very open-minded to universal ideas. And I'm a politician right now, so I'm coming from think tank background as well, but I'm right now a politician who is representing the interest of the Hungarian voters who sent us to the government. And I cannot support your utopian ideas, because all the utopian ideas at the end of the day will end up with war. And that's what happened with you in Kabul. You know, you were just there discussing wonderful ideas, talking about geopolitics, the future of United States with enlightened Afghan people. And then what happened 2 weeks after? The Taliban came, and there is no such country as it was Afghanistan for 20 years. And who is responsible for that? I mean, obviously you can say that the United States of America is responsible, but it's not their responsibility to manage a country. They just had to move in, and one day they just had to move out. It was a complete disaster. But you know, the leaders of Afghanistan, if for them, that kind of people you met with would have been important, that they shouldn't let the country to run by the Taliban. But it happened because of geopolitics, because of, you know, everyday life, it's about pragmatism. We cannot deny the fact that those who are coming from a different civilizational position than those who are here. Christians are different than Muslims. Christians are not better than Muslims. Muslims are not better than Christians, but they are different. And that can cause serious problems. It didn't cause refugee waves, didn't cause any civilizational problems in the past, because the Geneva Convention, which was accepted in 1951, it was a legal instrument for those who were, for political reasons, leaving the Soviet bloc. I mean, Eastern Europeans were leaving the Soviet bloc and wanted to leave that territory and go to the western part of the world. But they were Christians, and they were very much disagreeing with the values, what was promoted by the Soviet Union. So they were very ready to take the values and to be proud members of the Western world. But it's not anymore the case. Those people who are coming, they are coming from unstable regions, but they are coming because of economic reasons. They want to have a better life. They don't have any problem with the values back at there. The values provided by the state and provided by the Islam, and in Islamic countries, the state and the religion is always linked very closely. They are different. So the problem what we are causing is that we will have parallel societies, and we don't know what will happen. Some of them are saying that we have the capability of managing the coexistence of the people. And probably it can happen then in some countries or in some cities, like in London, there is a historical knowledge about how to manage people coming and living together from different environments. But there are some areas where we don't have any experience. Our own experience as a Hungarian, that we were occupied by the Turks, by the Ottomans for 150 years, and they killed our people, and we suffered a lot from that. And that can be a serious problem. And our only saying is that we shouldn't automatically go on that direction. You can go to that direction, you can choose freely, but we don't want to follow you. We want to have a different way of life. Obviously, there is a humanitarian obligation to help the people who are in need, but that's a different issue than immigration and taking mass migration waves.
Am I wrong if I frame the matter of this debate as you as a thinker, author, also I would say a liberal, thinking about the whole issue from an individualist perspective, and you as a politician and also as a conservative, you are thinking about it from the collective perspective. Is it a bad way to frame it?
I'm not sure it's the right way. I tend to think in a very political way about power. And so I'm very reluctant to introduce questions of the sacred scriptures. I'd be more focused on power. So we have a problem with refugees, which is going to get very bad over the next year or two. It's no secret. Perhaps 3 million Afghans will leave Afghanistan. They are doing already, and they have nowhere else to go but towards Europe. Perhaps Turkey and Iran will be able to stop the refugee wave, perhaps not. Perhaps it will have to be stopped at the Turkish-Greek border, we don't know, perhaps closer to Hungary. Now, do we need to talk about Islam? Do we need to say they are Muslims and we need to protect ourselves against this invasion of Muslims? Or do we actually have to think in a very political way? Do we have to say, well, there's a crisis in Afghanistan. The United States doesn't care anymore. We have to be involved in Afghanistan. There are countries actually that encourage this refugee wave because they know they don't have to deal with it. They know that Europe has to deal with it. Do we need to have a more ambitious foreign policy that we can actually work with Iran, we can actually work with Turkey? Is it a political discussion, not a theological discussion for me? And when we start talking about Muslims and Christians, we make everything more difficult. We become very defensive, trying to protect our own area.
But you frame these two categories as religions, while Balázs is framing them as cultures. Not only religious.
I see, the question is, there's a political question that we have to solve, and then there's a cultural question where I actually encourage the more diversity and richness. But of course, there's a political question that has to be solved about political stability. But does it help to call these people Muslims? For example, the Muslims that already live in Europe, if we say, like Prime Minister Orbán, they are Muslims, how can we then hope that they integrate when our first word is to say they are different from us? Then they will never integrate. if our first word is actually to say we have common problems and we have to solve them, and we need more money for public transportation, and we need more money for policemen, and we need...
No, I agree with you. I agree with you. That's the problem of the Western leaders, that they cannot be honest, because those people are there. Those people are citizens. They have voting rights, and you cannot raise the conflict. I agree with you. If you are a French politician, you cannot say the things which are said by the Hungarian Prime Minister, not because it's not politically correct. I think you sometimes misunderstand political debates and political correctness. I think freedom of discussion is very important, and we shouldn't cage us in the era of political correctness, because that happened with the Western universities, and it's quite scary. So freedom of speech is very important. But I agree with you that they don't have this right, because they have to represent their people. And those people are there. They are part of the society. So the role of the politicians shouldn't be raise tensions, but to cool down the situation. And they are doing that, because they have to cool down the situation, because the tension is there. It's in the society. But we Hungarians, we don't have this kind of problem, because the people are not here. And our only, just strategic saying is that, look, no one knows what will happen. In the last decades, we were just repeatedly hearing that, oh, culture and civilizational backgrounds, they do not matter. History do not matters. We just need workplaces and workforces, and we have serious demographic problems. And we should invite as many people as it is possible. But what we see is...
It's still the program of many parties.
It is still the program of many parties. What we see that there is a black side of it. There is a problem which is coming from that. And right now, we in Central Eastern European region, it's an advantage for us, a socio-cultural advantage, that we don't have this kind of problem. And we don't want to follow up. It would simply go against the interest of this region. It's so simple.
If we zoom out a little bit, and if you imagine a Europe of 2050, on the basis of hardcore realism, how do you see it? Please introduce that future of Europe in a few sentences. And once again, we're looking for not the Europe you're wishing for, but you see as the most likely scenario for us.
I see three scenarios, and then I'll tell you which I think is the most likely. There's a scenario where Europe will come under the control of some Eastern power or combination of powers. Again, as I said before, if China is able, perhaps after Russia has trouble moving into a new climate economy, oil prices and gas prices collapse, and China is able to extend its hegemony over Russia, and soon enough, Europe will also come under a Chinese-Russian hegemony. That's scenario number one. Scenario number two is United States and China get engaged in a global confrontation, and the United States increasingly feels that it has to exercise direct power over Europe to prevent the first scenario, to prevent China from exercising power over Europe. And so we become, instead of partners of the United States, we become a dependency, a colony of the United States. Third scenario, Europe solves its problems, becomes more united, creates an army, recovers its economic dynamism and creativity, and becomes a power equal to the United States or to China. What do I think is the most likely scenario? And maybe I don't have to explain. I think it's the second. It's the scenario where we become increasingly a colony or a dependency of the United States over the next 20 years.
So you see the US, just to clarify, you see the US as a strengthening power?
Yes, the US has...
Even with this Afghanistan thing and everything?
Yes, I think the United States will remain very powerful. And what we saw already over the past 6 years is a new way that America has to deal with Europe. Trump essentially sent us instructions and orders, do this with Huawei, do this with China. And now we saw in Afghanistan the same thing. Many people in Europe are quite upset with the Biden administration because essentially what happened was you have 2 weeks to evacuate your people, and then even the last 5 days, the US took over the Kabul airport. And As far as I know, there's still 500 German citizens in Kabul, trouble getting out, thousands of people that European countries wanted to get out, they couldn't. So what we're seeing increasingly is that Europe is having trouble dealing with the United States as it used to, as equals. We are increasingly receiving instructions from across the Atlantic. And I think China does not have time or the power to actually replace the United States in Europe. That's a science fiction scenario. The realistic scenario is that American power is going to become harsher and harsher over Europe as a way to stop Chinese power.
Balázs, I think at least you will have some disagreement.
Yeah. Do we have time to play a short game with
Absolutely.
the audience involved?
Absolutely.
Okay. Imagine the situation that we all who are in that room, we're making a decision that we go on a holiday together. Okay? Go on a holiday together, everybody who is in the room. And we have to decide where to go. I would like to offer you two options. Okay? Option A is Portugal. Wonderful beach, beautiful ladies, perfect cocktails.
Architecture.
Of course. If you want to have the beautiful buildings as well, then you can do it. So that's option A, beach holiday. And there is an option B, holiday in the Alps, Austrian mountains with, I don't know, goats and small lakes and fresh air and nice green grass and everything. You know what is connected with them. So that's option B. Okay. Option A, Portugal beach. Option B, Austria Alps. Now we all have to decide where to go. So who is voting for option A? Please raise the hand. Okay, wait, okay, then thank you. Who is voting for option B?
Kind of won, huh?
Now what should be the decision? Who won?
I think it's 2/3.
It's option A.
Option A.
Option A.
Yeah.
Option A won with 30%. So after the show, everybody has to go to Portugal together on a holiday. It's fine, isn't it? What's the problem with that kind of game, what we just did 2 minutes ago? Why on earth should we go together on a holiday? Why should we do that? It's crazy, it's nonsense. You know, we can like each other. We are friends with Gergely, and we have wonderful discussions with Bruno, and I know some of you. But if you want to go to the Alps, then go. If the others want to go to Portugal, then you can go. You don't have to go together on a holiday after the show. It's not necessary. So my point would be, and it's a philosophical point of view. It was a test of the democracy that we Europeans should be intellectually aware of the fact that our most important problem is to differentiate between the things, the public policies, where we have to cooperate, and we have to be united, and differentiate between those public policies where we can be different. And being different is not a problem, because that's how the West ruled the rest. That's how we were successful, according to Niall Ferguson, for example. That's how we became successful in the last centuries. We competed each other. We were competing. So the intellectual problem of the European Union is that you know, we want to do it everything together in a homogeneous way, which goes against the idea of democracy, and it's a problem. Intellectually, we should be more focused and make decisions between the policies where we can cooperate, like in the military, and in the policies where we cannot cooperate, and it's not a problem. We shouldn't cooperate. That's the advantage of Europe for like centuries, like the migration issue. If some of the countries want to go to that direction, it's fine. Then other countries should go to that direction. Coexistence can also be a winning strategy, not just homogeneous, putting together and following universal orders strategy can be successful. And that's intellectually not an easy thing to realize. If we're ready to realize that, and the politicians are ready to represent that on a European level, then we will be successful. Otherwise...
Quick response, and maybe we are...
I think it was a bad decision. We should have gone to the Alps. I was voting for that.
Maybe we are in agreement, but let me remember my 3 scenarios. Scenario 1, Europe under Chinese-Russian domination. Scenario 2, Europe under American domination. Scenario 3, Europe as a superpower equal to China and the United States. I'm not going to ask you to save time, but I suspect that the vast majority would pick scenario 3. Or perhaps you have a 4th, but within these 3, you pick scenario 3. Now, my question to Balázs is, what kind of unity do we need in Europe so that we can get to scenario 3?
That comes to my second question, which is a very simple one, because none of you mentioned the EU as an institution in your screenplays. So my very, very simple question is, according to your analysis, and we are, once again, we are talking about 2050, will the European Union exist in that very age? Just a yes or no answer, please, Balázs.
Yes, I hope so.
That was not one word, but yeah, please.
Yes, because it will be a matter of survival for us. Otherwise, we'll come under someone else's domination.
Fine, that's good news.
No, but, you know, we just...
You're very optimistic, both of you.
We have no other chance, just to be optimistic. But, you know, we have 70 years, not for Eastern European
countries. Was it a political answer or a personal answer from your side?
Both.
Okay.
Both. I think, you know, we have 70 years history with the EU and with the European integration. We, at Central European level, we have less, but we did our research. So the founding fathers of the European Union, they were very different type of people. Some of them were very leftist, some of them were quite moderate right-wing people, all of them were Christians, I'm just saying. All of them were Christians. And even among them, there was an open discussion what should be the purpose of the European integration. Some of them were saying that the final goal of European integration is to have a European superstate. But other founding fathers were saying that, no, that's not the case. The final goal of the European cooperation should be creating a platform for equal nation states to maintain peace and bring economic prosperity for everybody who is living in the European continent. So there was an ongoing disagreement between them. Meanwhile, for example, the Treaty of Rome was accepted. But they were very smart politicians, and they knew exactly that either that way or the other way. It shouldn't be decided by the politicians. It should be decided by the people, by the voters of the European member states. So if some policies, some unified policies, are supported by the European voters, then it's fine. Then that's an area where we have to cooperate. But if there are areas where there is a disagreement between the European grassroots voters, we either fed up democracy or we respect democracy, but we maintain the difference. I don't want to get rid of and end democracy. I want to maintain it. So that's the story. We just have to learn from the past. Founding fathers, they were nice and smart people.
So guys, let's close this by coming back personal. I'm curious what kind of thinkers, what kind of leaders you would see emerge from this audience, from Generation Z, for the next coming years, in order to grow up for the challenges we have just debated.
You know, we are living in an age of globalization, so the problems are global. And, you know, what is going on in Amazon, what is going on in Afghanistan, what is going on different places, everything is affecting everything else. So it's really a globalized era, and the media is bringing the problems of very different worlds close to us. But as it was clearly said by the professor, solutions are right now, currently, are not globalized. They're not globalized. We have local answers. And I think local leaders should be, for that reason, patriotic. And it's not a party political term. So I don't use it as a party political term. But we need leaders who are patriotic, which means that you have to understand what is going on around you. You have to understand the world. You have to travel from east to the west, from north to the south. Learn as much as it is possible. But then you have to be able to concentrate on your own homeland. And your responsibility as a leader is to bring peace and prosperity for the people who are living under your reign. That's so simple. It didn't change in the last centuries. It was always the goal of the politics. But right now, because of globalization and because of this kind of media attention, it's not very hard, or it's not very easy to focus on that goal. But please, guys, focus on that goal and be patriots.
Bruno?
It will be a somewhat similar but somewhat different answer. So I started writing books 3 or 4 years ago because I got convinced that we are living in a really historical moment. Something that hasn't been experienced in a century or perhaps in centuries. That our ideas are being replaced by new ideas. The world is changing fundamentally. The things that we consider were true without any discussion, they're not true anymore. And so my advice to you is enjoy this unique moment. Open up your minds. Be willing to question everything. Again, the old truths are gone. We have to find new ones. And as Balázs said, you can find them everywhere. You can find them in Islam. You can find them in China. You can find them in India. We need an open mind. It's not that they are Muslims and we are not Muslims. We are in this together. We are building a new world together. And elements of truth can be found anywhere in the world. And don't be afraid to get in trouble. You'll get in trouble if you're thinking anew, because the people that are still sticking to the old ideas, they will make sure that you get in trouble. But consider getting in trouble as actually a medal of achievement. And don't be afraid, especially if you're 20 or 25 or 30. There's no reason to be afraid. Just go out and enjoy.
Bruno, Balázs, thank you so much.